You plant a tiny seed in the ground. In that seed lies the whole nature of the tree. Hello everyone, my name is Laura Austin, and I'm doing my educational giant report on Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. This is a quote by him, and we will be returning to this later as it relates to his educational methods and theories. To begin with, a little bit of biography. Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi was born in Zurich, Switzerland, January 12 of 1746. His father died when he was 5 years old. His mother was very, very devoted to the education of her children, which was definitely a positive influence for his own educational theories later. At the age of 9, he would often go on visits with his grandfather, who was a pastor. This influenced his decision when he entered the University of Zurich in 1760 to study theology. He thought he'd like to be a pastor as well. While attending the university, he came to realize that wealth was not necessarily a factor to enjoy happiness and independence. And on that note, he then decided that he wanted to study law. He decided that he wanted to fight against the injustices he saw and heard amongst the common people. He fought hard and very firmly believed in this sentiment. However, while putting it into action, he came to realize that the first step to improving their condition was a better and more thorough education. So, throughout Pestalozzi's writings and teaching, he reiterated the principle that he felt that social reform could be achieved through better education. One way that I remember this is through my favorite play and later turned musical, Pygmalion, or My Fair Lady, for those of you who may have seen it. Professor Higgins, a character, tells Eliza Doolittle that the reason why she sells flowers and lives in the gutter is not because of her clothes or her wealth, it is because of her speech. The exact phrase, I believe, is she's condemned by every syllable that she utters. This is just one way to remember that, because your education can determine this much. Later on throughout the play, Eliza ends up signing up for an experiment that if she could speak better, then she could get a better job and maybe sell flowers in a shop instead of in the street. This is just one way that I remember it, because it relates to this story of Pestalozzi and what he came to realize about these people, as well as that idea. So, with that in mind, he decided to leave the university, and he had hoped that by taking up agriculture and farming, which was a common interest at the time amongst these people, that he might be able to enable them to work hard, provide for their families, in terms of education and moral training. So, with that in mind, he went to this farm in, I believe it is pronounced Neuhof, spelled Neuhof. Here he opened his home as a school to the poor children. He believed that he could better their education and teach them through their farm chores as well as through instruction. However, Pestalozzi began to fall into debt, and he was having a hard time keeping this school open out of his home. So he went out into the community and began to advertise and make an appeal for funds. He found a few supporters, some men that were fairly well-to-do, that were willing to contribute money and have their children taught by him. However, this project actually came to fail a little bit later as parents began to remove their children. Just the whole entire idea, and his methods especially, were not quite catching on with these people. And so, being fairly in debt himself, he had to abandon the whole idea. However, he was very anxious to make his views known, and so he took to writing, beginning with The Evening Hour of a Hermit in 1780. He continued his writing further, though. He published things such as the Leonard and Gertrude books, as well as some articles in the Swiss News. And so then, later on, in 1798, when the French Revolution was over and the Republic of Switzerland was founded, Pestalozzi was a zealous supporter, and he offered his services. Well, this came in handy for them because the town of Stans actually had just barely gotten done with a pretty bloody riot because they were not too thrilled and very against the new system. So Pestalozzi was sent to kind of recover the area. As well, many children were left without parents as a result of this riot, so he founded an orphanage there, beginning with 23 children, which quickly grew to 80 as he began to teach. However, after this riot, war seemed imminent, and French troops arrived fairly shortly after and ended up taking over the orphanage because they had no place to put their wounded. Due to poor health, as well as the devastation of having his hard work basically destroyed overnight by these troops, he was forced to leave and go back to his home in New. After the war, not too long after, he offered to return and redo the work he had, however, he was refused. So then instead, he offered his services at, I believe it was pronounced Bergdorf. He was refused at first. However, in 1799, he was given a few students, and then when his methods finally began to take, he was given some more. Here was the first praise that Pestalozzi had ever received, really, at all, especially from any political organization, and the idea began to spread that perhaps his methods is the way that they ought to run Swiss education. And so he came to establish, rather than a school, an institute in Bergdorf, and he directed that school until 1804. A few years there, he was given more and more students, and as after the institute at, I believe it is pronounced Verdun, spelled Yverdon. After that was open, different countries such as Prussia, Denmark, and Holland began to send student teachers to Pestalozzi to be taught how to teach, which his theories there influence a lot of our teacher training, as I understand. And so in 1805, he came to direct the school at Verdun as well. And he taught there until 1825, when he retired to his home in Neuhof. He passed away then in February 17th in 1827 at age 81. Throughout all of this, he developed his theories, again, from the very beginning, especially starting with when he decided to study law. He held that society could be improved through better education. And now I have a quote here by the that I found on the Columbia Electronic Encyclopedia that I think states his theories really well. It says, "To Pestalozzi, the individuality of each child is paramount. It is something that has to be cultivated actively through education. He opposed the prevailing system of memorization learning and strict discipline and sought to replace it with a system based on love and understanding of the child's world. His belief that education should be based on concrete experience led him to pioneer in the use of tactile objects such as plants and mineral specimens in the teaching of natural science to youngsters. Running through much of Pestalozzi's writing is the idea that education should be moral as well as intellectual. Never losing his commitment to social reform, Pestalozzi often reiterated the belief that society could be changed by education." So, just a way that I remember that is, for starters, he came to be known as the father of elementary education, and as he seemed to primarily deal with small children, that's one way to remember. As well, in, I believe it was 1863, Lewis Carroll wrote Alice in Wonderland, and this is a favorite childhood story. However, it originated because Lewis Carroll taught at the University of Oxford, and the dean asked him to teach his daughter how to row a boat. Well, his daughter Alice didn't have a very long attention span, so part of how Carroll went about this was by telling her stories and keeping her attention that way. He understood that the mind of the child was highly unique, and that by teaching in a way that meshes, so to speak, with that, you can achieve more growth. So that's just one way that I remember, because my favorite author, favorite story. So, moreover, object learning is something that pretty much everyone has encountered at some point during their academic career that has helped it to stick or otherwise memorize. So I'd like to end with talking a little bit more about Pestalozzi's quote. He started, "Plant a seed in the ground, and the seed lies the whole nature of the tree." Throughout his thing, by teaching these children in a way that was conducive to their ability to learn as well as their environment, much like planting a seed, you need soil, you need water, you need sunlight. He understood the basic needs of the children and applied that into his teaching, and so therefore that contributed to the entire nature of the tree and helped its growth. So that's one way to remember as well. I'd like to end now with a quote by Albert Einstein as well. He said, "All that is valuable in human society depends upon the opportunity for development accorded to the individual." Much like Pestalozzi came to realize that opportunities came through education and held that social reform could be achieved through better education, so these opportunities should be taken advantage of as they can. Pestalozzi's theories and methods influenced a lot of progressive theories and thinking, and I will leave it to you to determine from what I have said, as well as his emphasis on the individual and object learning, to determine how much he has influenced modern education. Thank you.